Hello, everybody, and welcome to the IDDSI webinar through thick and thin. It's being presented today by Danielle Monica and Jennifer Raminick. They're both located in Orange County, which is right near Los Angeles, California. They work at a children's hospital, and they've done a great job putting together this webinar. And more so, they've done a lot of work implementing IDDSI for their hospital, and they're here to share with us their discoveries and their successes with us. Wherever you are, welcome, and I'm Dave Liebert. I'm the Continuing Education Manager with the Canadian Society of Nutrition Management, and it's our pleasure to be here up in the Control Center in Toronto as Anthony Nime. He's making this webinar possible for us as well. If you please look to the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, you're going to notice a text box. Just like sending a text on your phone, all of us are in this IDDSI movement together. And if you could please ask questions, so just simply send in a text in that box. And if you could please include the city and the country that you're watching from, it'd be greatly appreciated. And what will happen is I will get the questions, and then once the presentation is over, I'll ask on your behalf the questions to Jennifer and Danielle. Also, I want to mention, depending on which organization you're with, you will be emailed a certificate of attendance for attending this webinar. And as far as the education points, if you could please contact your organization just to verify that system as well. This time, we'd like to begin our session. I'd like to go to the Children's Hospital of Orange County, located near Los Angeles, that I mentioned, with Danielle Monica and Jennifer Raminick. Danielle, she completed her master's degree at the California State University in Long Beach. She's been a therapist at the Children's Hospital of Orange County since 2016, where she assesses and treats children and infants in both acute care and outpatient settings with a variety of feeding, swallowing, and communication disorders. Additionally, Danielle serves an important role in her multidisciplinary and inpatient feeding program. She's presented both regionally and nationally and internationally on topics such as a curriculum-based language intervention, word retrieval in individuals with dysphagia, and the International Dysphagia Diet Standardization Initiative. And most recently, she has led the Children's Hospital of Orange County to hospital-wide implementation of the newly established IDDSI. And she's here to share her webinar with us today. Her partner is Jennifer Raminick. She also completed her master's degree at California State University in Long Beach. And she's recently earned her board certified specialist certification in swallowing. She has been a speech pathologist at the Children's Hospital since 2013, where she also assesses and treats feeding and swallowing disordered and medically fragile infants and children. Jennifer serves multiple leadership roles in the hospital, including clinical practice committee member to guide patient care and to mentor graduate students and fellow therapists with an emphasis on MBSS competency. Danielle and Jen, I want to thank you very much for your time here today with us, and that we were very eagerly awaiting your presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for having us, and thank you so much for hosting this webinar. Dave and Anthony, you have been such gracious hosts, and thank you to the entire IDDSI board for organizing this webinar and for your hard work you've done on this dysphagia diet. We really love the work that you've done and are excited to be working with you. So today we're going to be presenting on our process implementing IDDSI at our pediatric facility. So we are employed by CHOC Children's Hospital here in Orange County. Like Dave said, we're just a little bit south of Los Angeles. So they pay us a salary. As well, we have signed up on the IDDSI website to be champions and educate others on IDDSI and our implementation process. Today, we'd like to go over quickly some previous dysphagia diets, and quickly review IDDSI. Additionally, we will discuss why it was important for us at our hospital to use a standardized dysphagia diet to create consistency among providers. And throughout our presentation, we'll be discussing some barriers we encountered during the implementation process and how we worked through those to find solutions. So here at CHOC Children's, we are an acute care pediatric hospital. We have a level 4 NICU, a pediatric ICU, a cardiac ICU, a neuroscience unit, an oncology unit, med-surg floors, and 314 beds in total. Additionally, we have an outpatient rehab facility and multiple on-site clinics. So as stated before, we are in beautiful Southern California, and we are known for our sunshine and our beaches and our traffic. So we are going to be discussing some of our traffic jams we encountered during the implementation process, as well as the detours we took to identify solutions. So with this presentation, we want to talk about the importance of consistency in modified diets, the history of dysphagia diets. We want to give a brief introduction to IDDSI, discuss how we established the need for change at our facility, how we collaborated between key players, partnered with food service, actually got in the kitchen to do some research and development, how we provided hospital-wide education, as well as our transition and implementation period.
All right, so now on to our first traffic jam. So the way this whole project came about, I was in my fellowship year and I was asking questions about an evaluation that we did and our diet recommendations, and I realized that nobody was giving me the same answer. One afternoon, all of the therapists were in the office together at the same time, so I said, okay, this is my chance. I said, guys, what consistency would you consider infant formula? And some people said, well, it's thin liquid, and some people said half nectar, and everyone kind of looked at each other and said, uh-oh. So we definitely identified this as an area of improvement in our hospital, and then the project was born. So why is this important? Why do we need to ensure consistency? So really simply put, multiple labels increases the risk to patient safety. So that was from one of our IDDSI board's articles. The more options and labels there are, the more room for inconsistency and possible harmful user error. So other areas where consistency is important are patient care and research. So what we've learned from our personal experience and also research is that consistencies vary not only between therapists and hospitals, but also nationally and internationally. So in short, consistency contributes to improved patient safety, better treatment outcomes, and also evolution of our field through more consistent research that can be repeated. So a brief history of dysphagia diets. So we did some research on our own, and early on in our field, there were no really precise available viscosity categories or lists of foods falling into various viscosity categories. So the earliest that we could find when we did a little literature search was in 1998. Logeman outlined the following consistencies, which were pretty vague, just thin liquids, thickened liquids, purees, and then thick foods, which included thickened liquids. So for those of you not in the United States, the NDD, or the National Dysphagia Diet, was the framework being widely used before IDDSI came along. So the National Dysphagia Diet Task Force was established in 2002 with two main principles, which were recommending terminology and then viscosity ranges for each category of liquid. So these here were the terms that we were mainly using to refer to our consistencies before IDDSI came along. So the NDD was a great first step and really a vital milestone in our field, but further research was needed. In the NDD guidebook, the authors themselves actually stated that the information reflected an emerging science and that further research was required on an ongoing basis. There was a lack of accessibility to valid measurement. So the viscosity categories were measured in centipoise, and you need a viscometer, which is an expensive piece of lab equipment, not readily available to most people in order to measure that. So that made it not as available to the layperson. There were also ambiguous terms for the solids. For example, mechanically altered versus advanced. Kind of hard to tell what that really means by the name. And then poor reliability among therapists and poor carryover among caregivers.
So while we realized the need for consistency within our dysphagia diets, the NDD was difficult to use. So we attended a webinar much like this in 2016 and learned about IDDSI. I think Peter actually presented on that one. And the goal of IDDSI was to create global standardization of terminology and descriptions of food across ages, care settings, and cultures. So IDDSI was established in 2013, and one of the things that we really like about IDDSI is that all you need to test your food or liquid is a syringe, a stopwatch, and basic kitchen utensils. And all of the food and liquid can be tested in just 10 seconds or less. So here's the framework, and you can go to IDDSI.org if you are still learning about IDDSI, and they have really great articles and resources for implementing and just for getting more information. So that was our brief overview of IDDSI. For the rest of the presentation, we'll really focus on our implementation. So the first step for us was education. So like I said, we participated in webinars much like this, and we read lots of articles. We started with an in-service to our therapy staff and provided education so we were all on the same page and understood the need for change. We met with the managers of our rehab department, and we are very fortunate that they were supportive of changing our dysphagia diet. I think it helped that we led with choking hazard and patient health risk, and I think they recognized that we needed change in our dysphagia diets. We were also very fortunate because we had great support from our managers as well as our clinical nutrition and lactation department. And each department really understood that it would be a great undertaking, but after we provided our rationale for why we needed change, everyone was on board. So another traffic jam that we encountered was inconsistencies among therapists, and Danielle kind of touched on this in her first traffic jam. So in knowing that we did have different language even among our own therapists, we held an in-service and had all of the therapists in the same room, and we had a really great opportunity to get on the same page. So we asked each therapist how they would classify various foods and liquids that we use commonly at our facility. And we asked therapists how they would classify whole milk or various infant formulas or Pediatric or baby food using the previous language of our American NDD, so nectar, thin, chopped. And we found that even with therapists at the same facility, there were multiple different labels with each of these foods. So at that point, I think everyone really knew that we needed to change and we needed to find a way to measure food and liquid in a standardized way. So during our in-service, we also had a lab portion. So we used the IDDSI testing methods and tested our most commonly used foods and liquids here at our facility. So we used the flow test to measure liquids and the fork and the spoon test to measure solids. And there's more information on that on the IDDSI website if you're interested in how to perform those tests. So this allowed us to get on the same page since we had now we had an easily accessible way to measure foods and liquids. And we also had a great opportunity to introduce our staff to IDDSI and the testing measures within that. And so I think having the staff get their hands on the actual tests and be able to perform the test and see how easy it was really had our staff bought into this. So with our initial implementation process, we really had to define the role of our key players. So our dysphagia therapists, our SLPs, and our OTs would be responsible for assessing and recommending modified diets and providing family education. Our medical team would be asked to change diet orders and monitor ongoing patient safety. Our food service department would be responsible for preparing and delivering foods according to the therapist's diet recommendations. Our clinical nutrition and lactation department would monitor the nutrition and hydration of patients with a modified diet. Nursing staff at our facility thickens liquids at the bedside. We also ask that they monitor ongoing safety and assist with family education. And lastly, our caregivers are responsible for, once they go home, preparing the food and feeding the patient according to our recommendations.
All right, so on to another traffic jam here. So we did have some collaboration difficulties in the beginning. I think I would say this project involved the most collaboration between us as therapists and our food service department. So unfortunately, we, at the time of implementation, our food service department was without a director. So, you know, we had nobody to make decisions for us, nobody to really collaborate with or even get permission from to go into the kitchen and start testing. So that kind of backed us up a couple of months. As our solution, we picked up what the kitchen wasn't able to do. Jen and I actually ended up getting in there and creating recipes for all of the menu items. I'll talk a little bit later. Our clinical nutrition and lactation department actually created a recipe book to assist with the food service staff training. And our food service department did eventually get a director who really assisted us with education and the implementation of the project. There's a lovely picture of Jen and I in the kitchen with our hairnets on. So there were a lot of challenges with our previous modified diet menu at our facility. So we didn't have any recipes. Consistency is varied basically based on who was cooking. So one day you might have refried beans that come up like a watery bean soup, and the next day they come up like a really thick paste. So, you know, with that larger menu, there was more room for error. At that time, prior to our implementation, a patient could order anything they wanted on the menu pureed, and the chef would just add whatever, figure out how to make it pureed to be sent up. So there was no consistency. So with the creation of our IDDSI menu, we knew we wanted to have limited options for each solid category, at least to begin with. So you'll see in a moment, we have about 10 to 15 items for each category. We really wanted to make sure we started small for now and got a few things right before we expanded more. All of our recipes are easy to follow with minimal ingredients. I think the most that we have in one recipe is 3 ingredients. And we'll show in a moment that recipe book as well that shows, you know, each stage of the prep process and what the final product should look like. So for our research and development in the kitchen, our liquidized level 3. So here are some menu examples. We have some carrots, strawberries, chicken noodle soup, yogurt, cream of wheat, oatmeal. Something that was really helpful, we found that the Gerber stage 2 fruits and vegetable purees are level 3 liquidized. The meats were not, however. They came out to be more of a pureed level 4 when we did the testing methods. For levels 3 and 4, our dietitians preferred us using things like milk and chicken broth to thin out the puree rather than water in order to not mess with the caloric content of the food items. An example of one of our recipes there for the cooked carrots, it was 2 cups of our cooked carrots that were drained with 1.5 cups of vegetable broth. And when we do our flow test, that left about 9 cc's in the syringe after 10 seconds. As Jen mentioned, if you're newer to IDDSI and you have questions about any of the testing methods, the IDDSI website has a lot of great resources. So for our pureed level 4 menu, some examples of items that we have on the menu are here. Things like scrambled eggs, pancakes, French toast, etc. This photo that we have here is our macaroni and cheese. So for that recipe, that is 1 cup of our hospital recipe macaroni and cheese combined with 3 tablespoons of milk and then blended in the blender. So for the level 5 minced and moist category, so we know that's a 2 millimeter particle size mixed with some kind of sauce or gravy. So this was by far the most difficult recipe category for us to develop because of the small 2 millimeter bite size. And let me just clarify that 2 millimeter size of the particle is for pediatrics. For adults, I believe it's 4 millimeters. We ended up using a food processor to get that small bite particle size, and we'll get to that more in a moment. Some of the things on the menu, we have ground beef with marinara sauce, turkey and gravy, quinoa and pesto. My personal favorite is vanilla banana pudding. That's pretty delicious. So here's just an example. I think on the left side here, we have the turkey for our roasted turkey and gravy. And then on the right there is our quinoa and pesto. So for the soft and bite size level 6, some examples of the food items we have are banana, rice, some cheeses. We came across a pasta that's called acine di pepe, which is a really small little ball that fell under the correct bite size. So that was nice. We kind of took a step out there. Instead of using something like a noodle or a penne, which we would have to cut, we found a noodle that was already small to kind of take out a prep step for our kitchen. For pediatrics, we know that soft and bite size is 8 millimeters. For adults, it's about 1.5 centimeters or 15 millimeters. So again, finding a tool to do this was challenging, but we'll talk about that right here. So this was, I think, one of our biggest traffic jams. It took us a while to work through it. We knew that we needed a tool to be able to make these 2 millimeter lumps and the 8 millimeter size pieces. We knew that asking the kitchen to cut and chop by hand would just make a higher chance of, user error and non-uniformity. So we knew we needed to find some kind of tool. So for the minced and moist, as I stated before, we ended up using the food processor. So a few pulses in the food processor really got the consistency just right. We learned that we could only really use drier foods like meats, pastas, because the wet foods like fruits and vegetables just ended up turning into a puree. As we stated before, one of our dietitians gave us the idea of using the Gerber fruits and vegetables as the sauces for the level 5 minced and moist. One of our recipes, like I said before, that vanilla banana pudding is a Gerber banana puree that's mixed with pulsed shortbread cookies, and it's really delicious. So we searched high and low for a tool for that level 6 soft and bite size category that would cut into the 8 millimeter size pieces. The best thing that we could find was an as seen on TV kitchen tool called the Nicer Dicer. So it's plastic and not quite durable. I don't think it was meant for industrial use, but hopefully as we progress with this diet and it starts being implemented more widely, we'll have some company that wants to make a tool for us that'll be a little more durable.
In the meantime, our kitchen purchased 4. So.
Yeah. Most foods could go into the chopper, but we learned that we still had to slice them beforehand. So for an example, with our banana, we had to slice it in half lengthwise so that when we put it through the Nicer Dicer, it didn't turn into one long strip. It could be a cube. So here are just some examples of that recipe book that we were talking about. I believe these are our pureed recipes. So here is our French toast and then our spaghetti. So it's nice, it shows our staff step-by-step directions, what ingredients they need to grab, and then how much the final yield should be. Here is for our level 5 minced and moist category. So our ground beef with marinara sauce, and then there's that shortbread pudding. So the next piece is our hospital-wide education. I think the education was probably one of the biggest pieces of this project, one of the biggest undertakings, getting all of our key players on board and really convincing them of the need for change, and then talking to them about how we were going to be doing that. So for our dysphagia therapists, as Jen mentioned before, we held multiple in-services for our staff. So those in-services included labs where our staff got hands-on practice, and I think also that helped with convincing them that this was a really great framework to take on, because it gave us objective information, which we didn't have before. And, it's a lot harder to argue with objective information that's right in front of you, right? So we also created a mandatory online education module that we assigned to all of our therapists. And then we gave ongoing updates monthly at our discipline-specific rounds on where we were at with the rollout and what progress we had made during that month. So for our physicians, we made sure to include our residents and our attendings, and then also our GI physicians. For the GI physicians, we gave a little bit more detailed information about each diet consistency, because we knew that they'd be dealing with that a lot with their patients on modified diets. We did in-services, so in-person presentations for them. And then we also made a hot sheet, which here at our facility, a hot sheet just means it's a little one-page paper that gets posted that and also sent out to everyone, just kind of a quick and dirty explanation of the changes. So for our nursing staff, Jen and I spent many a morning coming into work at 5 o'clock in the morning so that we could educate both the night shift and the day shift. We provided in-services for all units of the hospital and also had the nurses do the hands-on flow test lab. So at our facility, nurses thicken liquids at the bedside. So, for example, if they ordered thickened apple juice, the thickening packet would come up from the kitchen on the tray, and then it's the nurse's responsibility to go to the kitchen, grab the beverage, and then mix it for them. So we thought it was really important to show them how to do the flow test. Also, they were going to be there to support family after our therapy staff did the initial education, so we knew it was important that they also know how to do it. We assigned them that same online education module that we assigned to our therapists. We also assigned it to not only the unit nurses, but also our GI, pulmonary, and neurology clinic nurses. We also printed out the IDDSI flow test posters from the website, and we laminated those and hung them in all of the kitchen unit areas. So there's step-by-step directions on how to do the flow test if someone gets stuck. For our food service department, we provided an in-service for the staff on the purpose of modified diet. So we thought it was really important to kind of take it back for them and explain why it was important and how it affects a patient if their puree is too runny or if the pieces are too big. We kind of took it back a step and talked to them about aspiration and the risks of aspiration, just to kind of explain a little bit more the seriousness of the situation and why it was really important for us to get this right. Our clinical nutrition and lactation departments and the director of food service provided the direct staff food preparation and training for each recipe. So after Jen and I developed the initial recipe, they did the training with the staff and used that recipe book to help teach them how to make the recipes. As I mentioned before, there are a multitude of resources on the IDDSI website. I think on the right here is the flow test poster that we printed and hung in all of our nursing units. So there's a lot of helpful information on the website. IDDSI's done a lot of the work for us.
So the next little hurdle we had to get through was just our transition period. So we've educated our staff, and the staff wants to start using correct standardized language, but we didn't have it available in our charting, and with a lot of our commercial products like thickeners that we were using, they weren't quite ready to adapt to the new IDDSI language yet. So we actually wrote the board and asked, what should we do in the meantime? And they suggested using this transitional language. So we would say nectar thick liquid / mildly thick level 2. And now we've actually started to see some of the commercial products being distributed with the IDDSI language and the number system and the color system. So I think as you guys start to implement, this is going to be a lot easier for you, but we had to do this for about 6 months or so. So our last traffic jam is to help you understand that this is a giant undertaking and to have just a fluid timeline with yourself and your facility. So we had quite a few unexpected events happen during our implementation process. We were supposed to go live in early June of 2017, and then late July 2017, and mid-September, and then we finally went live November 7th, 2017. So we had JCO visit, which is our accreditation board within the whole hospital. We had somebody go on early maternity leave. We had employee turnover. So we thought, while we had these great ideas of deadlines, it didn't always work out. One of the things that we would like to give you guys a tip as well is that our medical record system is all electronic. And we thought, oh, that'll just be really easy to update. It'll just be a few changes here and there. And Danielle and I worked one evening and came up with 18 pages of a Word document of changes that we would need to make throughout our entire electronic medical records. So that was a big undertaking, and if you are looking to implement, you should start that sooner rather than later. But once we got started, it's working great. So we just hope with this that you will have a fluid timeline, be flexible with yourself and with your key players. This involved a lot of trial and error in the kitchen. We spent a lot of time coming up with each of these recipes because we had to do this a lot of times a half a teaspoon at a time. And so it really does take time. There's a lot of layers and there's a lot of departments involved. So hopefully our detours here have helped make your road to change a little bit smoother. And we've provided our email there at the bottom if you have any specific questions about implementation that we don't get to throughout this webinar.
Danielle, Jennifer, I want to thank you so much for all that you've done to put this webinar together for us. More than that, though, I want to thank you for all that you do on a daily basis for those children in the hospitals, those heroes that are battling through their illnesses that are in those hospitals, benefit from all of your care and your compassion that you have for them. For our audience here, of course, for what you've done for us, implementing the IDDSI system, thank you very much for sharing this with all of us. We're going to get to a few questions, and before I do, I forgot to mention an introduction. On the call, also behind the scenes, we'll probably hear from them, is our two co-chairs of the IDDSI movement, Julie Tuchero in Brisbane, Australia, and also Peter Lamb. He's also on the call as well. Both are great people and are very knowledgeable in this topic as well. Let me get to some questions here. For people that are wondering, there's a lot of interest in the slides, and these slides, I believe, are going to be shared on the IDDSI website. I'm going to post their website email address, the IDDSI website on here as well too. But all of the information and slides are presented on there as well. So I'm having a little bit of a difficulty here with my screen, so please bear with me. Okay, from Boise, Idaho. What limitations do you put on time after foods have left the kitchen? Were there foods that change consistency after time has passed?
That is an awesome question. So like I said, we just implemented this November 7th, so just a few months ago, and we're still collecting some data. We order trays weekly and just assess if the foods are being made and served correctly. And that's one of the things that we are noticing, especially with any of the foods that we added rice to. So with some of our soups and some of our purees, we've pureed rice into that to create a thicker consistency. And we do notice that the rice does tend to thicken over time. We haven't set a time limit yet, but we actually were just talking about that this week, that we're noticing they're usually, so at our facility, we have to pick the trays up ourselves and take them to any patient on a modified diet if we're testing the consistency. So we tend to pick it up and deliver it pretty quickly. But we've noticed that if there was a tray being delivered by food service, that it could take up to 45 minutes, and that may be too long.
And just to add on to that too, I think that's here's a great way to say how awesome the IDDSI framework is, that we are able to test all of these foods so easily at the bedside. So we're also training our parents to be able to test these foods and implement this at home. So if the food comes up to the bedside and then maybe it doesn't look right, maybe it did thicken with time and now it's too thick, you know, we can use that fork or the spoon test to kind of see if it's appropriate to feed to the patient or not. So it's really easily accessible.
Okay, thank you. Bill, a lot of people asking you about your cookbook. A lot of people are asking for the recipes and the work you've done through there. In fact, you guys will probably make the New York Times bestseller list if you publish it. Do you have it published, or do you have recipes that you would share?
So we're definitely looking at that. I think one of the reasons that we're a tad bit hesitant is we make a lot of our own food in our own kitchen. So we don't use like a boxed macaroni and cheese, or even our soup recipes all come from within our own kitchen. So our way that we create them may be different than how your facility creates them. And so our recipes may be different, may produce a different yield than what you would produce at your kitchen. We do have the recipes, and if anybody's interested, please email us and we can send those along and just give you an idea of some of the different recipes we created. But I would definitely encourage you guys to look at those and see what you're using in your own kitchens to see if that would work for you.
I think they could be used as a great starting point, but you're probably going to have to edit and do a lot of testing using the ingredients that you have in your kitchen.
Okay, thank you very much. I didn't know if Julie is on the call from Brisbane, and I think she might wanted to add to that. She just sent me a little message. So Julie, I don't know if you can hear me.
I can. Thank you so much, Dave. I was just going to add in something else that's on the resources section of the IDDSI website. We've created some audit tools so that you can print those off and use them to, you know, to keep a record of your testing. And so that could also be, I guess, a good quality improvement activity as well over time to sort of track and see, you know, what changes are required and whether you need fewer changes over time. That was all I wanted to add. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Julie. The next question is from Castlemaine, Victoria, Australia. How many other hospitals and services do you liaison with that have adopted IDDSI?
No one.
You guys are our leaders, our pioneers.
We are. That's how we like to frame it. We're the pioneers. We actually discussed implementing this with one other facility all the way on the other side of the United States in Connecticut. And we discussed some of these issues that we were running into. But it was mainly just ourselves. We did have some great support from the IDDSI board. We were really fortunate that they had some guidance for us on implementing, and this type of webinar wasn't available at the time, so hopefully this will give you some help as well.
Really is an amazing feat that you guys have accomplished, you know, of course, doing it and then to put it all together to share with us. Now, I would imagine, I know Julie's still there behind the scenes, and she might be able to help us more. If people, Julie, want to give feedback to how their implementation is going in different hospitals, is there a spot on the IDDSI website that they can go to as well?
So we've got the general email address, which is communications@iddsi.org. But also for anyone who's attending from Australia, we've got australia@iddsi.org as well. So if you've got some specific questions, and we've got similarly, we've got uk@idsi.org, we've got a number of email addresses where if you've got quite specific requests about your region, we are sort of madly behind the scenes developing resources to help people, and we look forward to sharing an implementation guide very soon. Peter, I'm not sure whether you'd like to chime in there about that one.
Yes, on the IDDSI website, under the implementation tab and IDDSI in progress, you will also see a sub-tab that says share your stories. And in that section, you will be able to tell us about your implementation journey. And we would be most thrilled if you write a little caption for us, share an image with us, which is available, and then tell us where you're at with regards to your implementation journey, and whether you're monitoring, you're in the aware phase, the prepare phase, or fully adopted phase. And we would be most thrilled to share your story with the rest of the world. I think a lot of people around the world are waiting to hear stories about implementation. We are very, very thankful that Jen and Danielle are so brave to be our pioneers in presenting this webinar. They have definitely encouraged others to have come forward. We have received a number of emails from people who, after the first webinar we hosted, indicating that they would like to share their story. So if you would like to present something to us about what you're currently doing, we will be most thrilled to receive it. Once again, go to the IDDSI website. Under the implementation tab, you'll see IDDSI in progress. Click on that, and if you scroll down the page, midway through the page, you'll see a tab that reads share your stories. Once you click on that, it will give you a whole bunch of fields to fill in your story, your content, share with us an image, tell us where you're at with regards to your implementation process, and then organization and your email, and we will be most happy to share that with the rest of the world. So we thank you in advance for submitting your stories, submitting your news about where you are in the IDDSI implementation journey.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, well, it's a wonderful group, the IDDSI movement and the people behind it. And it seems like we're all into this together, and we all share with one another how we've succeeded and questions we might have. And Jennifer and Danielle here, of course, have led the way by opening the door for us to share. So this is a wonderful, it's a wonderful movement. From Melbourne, Australia, do you find and how do you handle any inconsistencies in prepackaged food, such as Gerber products?
For the most part, we found that the Gerbers, the stage 2 fruits and vegetables, were level 3, the liquidized, and the meats were level 4 puree. We did find some inconsistencies with some of our liquid thickeners, that they weren't coming out to be the thickness that they were supposed to be. And I think the beauty of IDDSI is that you have the flow test. So even if the recipe that they're giving you on the package isn't coming out to be the consistency that you are desiring, you can change your recipe and continue to test it till you reach the correct consistency.
Okay, from Minnesota, where can you find the mandatory online education for nursing and dysphagia therapists? Did you formulate it yourselves?
Yeah, so that was something that we created. We actually did something similar to this. We made a little PowerPoint presentation that they kind of click through and guide themselves through, and then there's a little quiz at the end. That was something that we created with one of our education departments at our hospital. But I think that's something that we'd be happy to share. Mm-hmm. We can send that along to Peter and Julie to share with everyone.
From Baltimore, We look forward to working with you and implementing the IDDSI in our facility. In terms of mixing milk and chicken broth, did the temperature of the liquid affect the consistency of the product?
Not to our knowledge. So we used cold milk and cold liquids and then hot food. Some of the foods we trialed weren't able to be used because when they were hot, they turned into a big gummy mess. So I think we trialed an enchilada, and we trialed some other kind of pasta dish, and it turned into a big gummy mess. So we found that a lot of the items that used gluten-based products, so like our pastas, our breads, our flour tortillas, didn't work well for some of these consistencies, just because when they were changed, when they had that hot temperature and the steam from the food itself, it didn't turn out well.
They became too sticky.
Thank you. It's an interesting question here. It might be more for Peter and Julie. This is from Qatar, the United Emirates. We are in a unique position where the hospital we're working at has just opened. So it's kind of a neat opportunity. They're just opening up a hospital over there in the United Emirates. What advice do you have for these folks to start IDDSI from scratch as they're beginning their hospital service from scratch?
Dave, thank you very much for that question. And the audience member who is asking this question, thank you very much for considering IDDSI in a new hospital setting. May we congratulate you, first of all, for being part of this new hospital. And we're also saying we are ultimately envious because this will be the best opportunity to simply introduce IDDSI rather than having to change from an existing system. So please go on to our website and look at the resources that are available. For those of you who may not have visited the IDDSI website for a little while, we have actually transformed the resources section of the IDDSI website. Again, navigate to the website. The second tab from the right is the resources tab. If you just scroll down on the page, you'll see a number of different listings, such as IDDSI 101, implementation, presentations, publications, e-bite newsletters, newsroom, and videos. Click on the implementation tab and you'll see a number of resources that are now available to you, such as adoption posters, conversion charts, the audit sheets, the labels, the MAPA logos, as well as abbreviations that we have now put up on our website. So please make use of any of those resources. In the post-webinar survey that you're going to receive, we will be asking you to provide us with some more details as to resources that you might be wishing. Please fill in that question with the resources that you're looking for. And once again, the IDDSI board of directors and the working teams will look at the requests that come in, and we'll do our best to make sure that we get the resources up on our website and available to you. So in terms of going back to the question about the new facility, plan to implement IDDSI right at the start and make sure that you work with food service, make sure that you work with your whole healthcare team, make sure you include the information technology people when it comes to the communications of diet order entry, food service production, assembly and delivery. We are going to publish the IDDSI implementation overview and guide very, very shortly. That might be another document that may be helpful to everyone as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Peter, while I have you on the call, this next question might be best for you as well. We have a question here coming from India. Coming from India with a lack of diet plans and respect to dysphagia rehabilitation, what would you recommend us to start with?
That almost sounds like a question that is preparing us to say to you, please start with IDDSI. Once again, it's been published based on the best current evidence. And one of the things that have been brought to our attention is the fact that there are many people who are working to implement IDDSI, but the people outside of the healthcare circle may not be as familiar with swallowing issues or eating and drinking concerns. So it's very important that when we do the education and training about IDDSI, that we also talk about why we provide texture modified foods for people, why we would thicken drinks to people, so that people can actually understand the relationship between the use of texture modified foods to help people that have dysphagia and swallowing issues to best manage, and the use of thickened drinks and how that helps to allow people to have more time to coordinate, prepare for their swallow. It's very important that everyone is aware of the issues that people have when they have dysphagia, and then they'll have a better understanding of why we would provide them with the texture modified foods and the thickened liquids. I think someone had also asked a question very similar to this in a past webinar. If you don't mind, I'll also expand on this. There were a number of people who asked, well, how do we deal with food service staff or nursing staff or other healthcare professionals that push back about the implementation of IDDSI? And I think the one thing that people really should emphasize is the fact that IDDSI was developed to help to improve patient safety through the communication of using consistent terminology. And I think we need to, again, re-emphasize that as the reason why IDDSI is being implemented or should be implemented. And as well, again, there are textural levels and liquid thickness levels that were not present in other national standards or other standards that people may have been using in the past, which may actually be best suited or more suited to the individuals that you might support that have swallowing, eating, and drinking issues. So overall, it really is to help to improve patient safety, but also quality of life and enjoyment. So I think, we really shouldn't forget the swallowing part of this and solely focus on the diet textures and the liquid thickness.
Okay, Peter, while I got you, one more quick question for you. Can someone at IDDSI please create stickers of the color number triangle system for our paperwork and patient charts? Is there stickers or different things that are being worked on behind the scenes?
Absolutely. If you navigate once again to our resources section and you click on the implementation tab, under that tab, you will see labels of IDDSI levels. These are all individual picture files of the different IDDSI levels. You can easily download these, import them onto a sticker template, and feel free to print them out and stick them onto whatever products that you're using as a transitional terminology. We also will have another set of stickers coming your way very shortly that simply just reads, "This will soon be called," and whatever the new level is.
Okay, thank you. We'll go back to Jennifer and Danielle. This is the dietetic team from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. Just a question about the use of food processors. Have you come across any inconsistent sizes from different machines that you've used?
So we only have our one machine that we've used, and that's like basically a big industrial size food processor. food processors are a little tough. I don't know from your own experience if you're big in cooking, but even I've found it takes a while to make everything this small piece. So you kind of have to pulse the entire thing for a little bit longer because, you know, if you do it for a short while, most of the pieces will be small, but then you'll still have some big lumps. So what Jen and I did was we actually timed how long it took approximately for all of the pieces to become the small 2 millimeter size. I can't quote off the top of my head how long that took, but we did a couple different trials and saw how long it took, you know, until all of the pieces were those small pieces. And, you know, you can always eyeball it if there's those big chunks, kind of pick those out as long as the rest of them are small. But to answer your question, no, we only really used our one food processor. And then, you know, as part of this project, our food service director ordered a lot of rulers for the kitchen. So, you know, they know the size that it's supposed to be and they have someone on the line that's checking everything. So if it's not correct, they can fix it.
Another thing I was going to say, this doesn't necessarily relate to food processors, but when Danielle was going over our chopper for the soft and bite-sized diet, our nicer dicer, it is actually a 6 millimeter hole that the product is put through, but because we're using such soft foods that once they were squished through the nicer dicer, they expanded and they all measured out to be 8 millimeters.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to ask Danielle and Jen, if we had a session a week or so ago, and there was an opportunity that you had to teach the parents to help thicken their foods for their children. And I was wondering if you'd be willing to share that again with this audience.
Absolutely. So I think, like I said, one of the greatest tools that we have got from the, I mean, there's so many great, amazing things about IDDSI that we have really just hung on to. But I think one of the things that has helped us in our practice, especially with infants, is the flow test, because in the past we had no way to measure what consistency your liquid actually was. So we didn't have, most therapists didn't have access to viscometers, and we definitely didn't. And so that involved us kind of holding up the liquid or pouring it off of a spoon and guessing if that was the right consistency, especially for infants, because a lot of times they don't have we can't use the commercial-based thickeners like Simply Thick, so that come with pre-made recipes. So we love the idea of the flow test, and I think the last time we talked about this, I shared a patient that I had worked with that had a laryngeal cleft, and she needed thickened feed so that she could eat without aspirating. And so we took her to swallow study, and we had different consistencies of barium mixed up, and we did the flow test with each consistency. So we could get as specific as not just thin liquid, slightly thick, mildly thick. We could get as specific as there's 1 cc left in this syringe after the flow test. There's 2 cc's left in after the flow test. And so with this patient specifically, we found that if we had 4.5 cc's left in the syringe after the flow test, if she could drink a liquid that thick, she didn't aspirate on it. And so that was a really amazing feat for us, because I think in the past that baby probably would have had a G-tube because we wouldn't have had as many options for her.
I think one of the biggest pieces too here is that the feedback we're getting from a lot of our families, and especially our families with these infant feeders, is just that sense of empowerment that they can take this syringe test home and know exactly how to mix and know that they're doing it the right way because they have a way to verify that. So we've gotten a lot of feedback from our parents about how empowering this is to help them be able to care for their child.
It's a remarkable experience you must have had. It must have been very wonderful to know you made such a big difference to those people, and of course many others that you've helped as well too. Thank you very much for sharing that.
Of course, thank you.
From Edmonton, Alberta, do you have any experience with changes to the diet order entry systems or Seaboard menu databases?
Yeah, so we did actually have one instance in which a resident was able to put in one of our old diet orders after our go live. That was a situation where Jen and I didn't even know that the old descriptors were in there. We thought it was all the new terminology, so we were able to get a hold of our IT department and have them remove the old ones in addition to adding the new terms.
And I think we did work with our IT department very closely to make sure that all of our documentation synced well together. So our recommendations as dysphagia therapists worked with the orders that were being put in by the kitchen staff, which also worked with the doctors putting their diet orders in. And I think as at our facility, at least, we, the dysphagia therapists, happen to kind of get in the middle of that loop a lot. So we speak with the doctor, put in our, and request our recommendations for diet orders. Then we're the ones usually ordering the first few trays for the patient. So we talk to the kitchen and make sure that they know that everything's going smoothly on that end as well.
To speak to the C-board piece, it was actually one of our dietitians that handled C-board. I don't know C-board very well. I understand it's its own kind of complicated little world, so I can't quite speak to that. But if you do have a specific question, you could email us at that email, and we could ask our dietitian for some guidance.
Okay. We're at the top of the hour. Are you both okay for another 4 or 5 minutes?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay. Get to a few more questions. A lot of people complimenting you on your wonderful presentation. This next question, I'm not sure where it's from. As a primary care doctor and also a dysphagia dad, the flow test was such a relief to find. Before that, all I had were YouTube videos about things sticking to spoons, and it was very difficult to know if I was adequately thickening my toddler's fluids. So thank you. It's a nice message, and I wanted to make sure I pass that along to all of you.
oh, that's awesome.
Next question, were dietitians involved in the recipe development? Was a decision made to not use commercial food thickener? And thank you for sharing this presentation.
Yes, so our dietitians were involved in helping us develop recipes. I think when Jen and I first started testing things, some of our recipes were not the most nutritionally sound. We were like, oh, well, this sounds like it would be good.
They were delicious.
Yes. We added a lot of syrup to thin out our pancakes initially and tried using things like whipped cream, and one of our dietitians was like, well, why don't we help you out a little bit? So they definitely provided input on maybe some more healthy, well-rounded options. Our kitchen has a big emphasis right now on being mindful and being healthy, so they were able to help us kind of think of other foods and other ways that we could, other things that we could add to the different consistencies to help thicken. And then in terms of the use of commercial thickener, so for our liquids, as we previously mentioned, we do use a commercial thickener that gets sent up with the tray. And then, like we said before, the nurse will grab the kitchen from, I'm sorry, the beverage from the kitchen on the unit floor and then thicken it at the bedside. We did not use any commercial thickeners for the solids. We wanted to use actual foods. So for example, Jen mentioned a lot of our soups are thickened with rice. We found that that came out really nice. You know, we used milk and chicken broth and things like that to thin out some of the items for the purees. So we tried to use all real foods, again, just kind of making it easier for the kitchen staff using things that were familiar to them.
And we're actually working, well, our dietitians and our food service department is working on new shake recipes that don't involve ice cream. So they use a lot of whole foods, again, like avocados and some of our, even our Gerber stage 2 fruits and vegetables to incorporate into these shakes that they won't melt as easily like you would with an ice cream. And also they're more nutritious, but this is something that we're excited to incorporate into our IDDSI menus as well.
Okay, thank you. 2 more quick questions. From Hamilton, Ontario, who is in charge to prepare the VFSS stimuli?
So we use Veribar for our swallow studies. So right now the Veribar products are still using the old National Dysphagia Diet terminology. So we have thin and nectar and honey Veribar, but those consistencies turn out to be the same as the IDDSI consistencies. And then we did end up developing a recipe for level 1 slightly thick.
And IDDSI actually has on their website information on how Veribar compares to IDDSI and what the flow tests are for each of the consistencies.
Okay, thank you. Before I ask the last question, just want to let everybody know I put the link for IDDSI's website and also for the email address for Danielle, in case you folks have some questions for her. Danielle and Jennifer, great people to work with, and I'm sure they'll be more than happy to pass along any more information to you. The very last question, and then I'll turn it over to you guys to close up, is what challenges did you have to get the staff on board, cooks, servers, etc., and how did you deal with that?
So I think initially like we said, we didn't have a food service director or manager. So we tended to just show up in the kitchen and start throwing things in blenders. And I think that was actually to our benefit because we got to know the kitchen staff pretty well. And when we were asking them for another cup of rice or another cup of tomato sauce, they started asking questions too about what we were doing. And so I think the process took a little while for us to develop. And in that time, we also built relationships with the people in our kitchen, which was a great opportunity. And then once it came time to roll this out, we were able to explain more about what we do just as dysphagia therapists in general and why it's important that we have these specific recipes and these specific consistencies. So like Peter said, just education was such a huge buy-in or a reason for buy-in for us.
Yeah, I think, it's important for us to remember that in this field, we are all so immersed in this, right? But for an outsider who has never really dealt with this, they don't know what a modified diet is and why it's important. So to really kind of back it up for our staff in that in-service that we provided, we talked about, what is aspiration? What does it mean when food or liquid gets to your lungs? How is that harmful? And how does the food that they're preparing, help with that? So I think that was really helpful for establishing their buy-in.
And I think too, just this week we had, so our kitchen trays we have runners that run from the kitchen to the patient floors and the patient rooms. And a lot of times it's those runners that check the trays before they go out to the patient rooms. And just this week, one of them told me, I got this soup and it was too thin. It's not like how you like it. That's what she said, but not like how you like it. So I had them go back and look at the recipe and they didn't make it right. So I had them do it again. And I think their buy-in is so great because they actually see who the food is going to and they see the patients. And so they recognize the need to get it right.
Thank you very much. Before we close up, I just wanted to mention to everybody, this webinar is an hour long, but the time and effort that you guys went through to put this together for us is greatly appreciated. And all of our audience, there's a very short survey for your comments and questions. If you could just please take a minute to fill it out. We'll get to that. We'll send you to your surveys just a minute from now. Now, I don't know if Peter or Julie wanted to have any comments before we close.
Dave, thank you very much for letting us present some final words. For those still on the line, we just wanted to acknowledge the very, very generous contribution from Dave and from Anthony that you do not see on the screen, but he is behind the scenes operating all the technical parts, and he is an absolute techno genius to make sure that this webinar happens. Thank you so much to Jennifer and Danielle for being such great pioneers and having the courage to be able to share this information with everyone. We thank you all for attending. We know that you are taking precious time out of your day to listen to a webinar. Some of you very, very late at night. We appreciate you taking the time to be on this call to learn about how to implement IDDSI. Once again, we want to emphasize the fact that we don't do this just because we're trying to make the world a chaotic place. We're actually trying to make it more systematic and orderly to help to improve patient safety and to help to improve the quality of life of individuals. So when you do have those tough moments and you do have pushback from the staff, from the healthcare professionals, bring yourself back to that place of why we're doing it. We'll emphasize to the group here once again, the IDDSI board are all volunteers. We probably are a little crazy because a lot of times we take calls late at night, early in the morning, but we do this because we truly believe that this will make our practice so much better when we have consistent terminology that can be used in all walks of life, not only just in the caregiving, not only in food service, but it also helps the researchers to be able to now be able to provide us with better information that can support our practice in the future. So once again, we can't say, words just do not express how much we appreciate what everybody is doing. Thank you once again, and we hope you'll be able to join us for future webinars. Do check back in at the IDDSI website. We have a number of webinars coming up yet. And again, fill in the survey, let us know what tools you are looking for, and we would also be happy to hear suggestions for future topics for webinars. Thanks once again, everyone.
Thank you, Peter and Julie. It's always wonderful working with you. But Danielle and Jen, this has just been a wonderful presentation. Thank you again for everything that you do for these children in your hospital. And thank you very much for sharing it all with us. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you all so much.
Okay. So long, everybody.